Hey, what is going on guys? Welcome back to another video. So today we're going to be taking a look at the benefits and downsides of jailbreaking a PS5 this time, and it is definitely not as clear-cut or one-sided as the PS4. So the latest jailbreak for the PS5 requires the console to be on firmware 3.0 to 4.51, any firmware in between, which is this number here in the console's information page in the settings. Back in 2022, the first exploit for the PS5 was released in the form of a kernel exploit that could be triggered from the console's web browser. Unlike the PS4, the PS5 doesn't have a dedicated web browser application, but it does have an inbuilt browser that can be accessed via the user guide option in the settings menu. Redirecting this page to an exploit site via a custom DNS is all that's required to get the console to a website that can initiate the exploit. The exploit unlocked the console's debug settings that are only meant to be accessed on development kit consoles and gives us access to the console's file system through FTP, allowing us to add our own web browser shortcuts and custom themes. However, this wasn't considered a jailbreak at the time, as the PS5 has a number of additional security measures that didn't exist back on the PS4, one of the major ones being a hypervisor that restricts access to the kernel. Luckily, in 2023, a workaround was discovered by Astrelsky and Nullpointer, where the Redis server could be hijacked to spawn a daemon process that could run in the background and handle the requests that would normally be handled with kernel patches. So this solution does have its issues, but it was able to unlock a similar level of functionality as previous jailbreaks had on the PS4. This enabled homebrew running on the PS5 for the first time in the form of PS4 homebrew apps that target the PS5 through its backwards compatibility feature. The jailbreak is loaded through the web browser, then a payload is injected known as ETA-hen, which enables homebrew, FTP, plugins, and more. You can download an app called the Homebrew Store from ETA-hen, which acts as an app store for downloading other homebrew applications. There aren't that many available yet, but there is the PS5 Explorer app from Lappy, which gives you access to the file system, and Items Flow that acts as a game launcher with a number of useful utilities for jailbroken consoles. So let's start off by going through the benefits of jailbreaking the PS5. One of the main ones is having the ability to run PS4 games at higher frame rates. When the Xbox Series consoles were released, Microsoft worked on their own in-house solution to improve the performance of older generation titles on their next-gen platform without requiring any input from the game's original developers. Whereas Sony, on the other hand, left it up to the developers to release their own patches to unlock the frame rates and improve the performance of their PS4 games when running them on the PS5. Now, few developers took up the offer. One of them that I can think of is Bend Studios with Days Gone, where they released a 60 FPS patch when running it on the PS5, but the majority of developers never bothered to release any patches to improve the performance of their PS4 titles when running them on the PS5. Now, this has resulted in many PS4 games still being locked to 30 FPS, even when running on a PS5, with no noticeable difference when compared to running them on a standard PS4. Now, the PS5 jailbreak has shown us how trivial of a process this would have been, as developer Illusion has released many 60 FPS patches for multiple PS4 games, like Gravity Rush 2, Red Dead Redemption 2, CTR Nitro Fueled, The Order 1886, and many more games, even Lance McDonald's famous 60 FPS patch for Bloodborne. All of the games listed there and more have no trouble hitting a locked 60 FPS on PS5 with a simple patch. Some PS4 games even have fully unlocked patches which will allow frame rates to go as high as possible, allowing the PS4 games to hit frame rates in excess of 100 FPS or more. Another benefit is that you essentially have a jailbroken PS4 built into your PS5 thanks to its backwards compatibility feature. Most of the features discussed in this video here about the PS4 will apply to PS4 games running on a jailbroken PS5 through backwards compatibility. This of course includes Piracy. Normally the PS5 would not be able to load PS4 games that target higher firmware versions than the one the PS5 needs to be on to run the jailbreak. But the very latest PS4 game releases can be loaded on a jailbroken PS5, and this is down to some of the pirates having the decryption keys necessary to decrypt newer PS4 games, which they then backport to run on older firmwares, which also makes them playable on jailbroken PS5s. The process of installing and running them is much the same as on PS4. These games come in .pkg files known as fake packages, which are decrypted versions of the PS4's installable format, similar to APK files on Android. The PS5 can install them through the package installer in the debug settings, and they can be launched from the home menu like any other app when the jailbreak is running. This also unlocks another benefit of jailbroken PS5s, and that's being able to play previously delisted content, or in other words, content that Sony doesn't want you to have access to anymore, and you can run that again on your PS5. So game demos that have been lost to time can be resurrected on jailbroken consoles. Sony even went to the extent to blacklist some PS4 apps that they didn't want running on the PS5. When trying to run these apps, even if you have a valid license for them, it would result in an error saying that the app is not available on the PS5. Whereas in truth, all PS4 apps are loadable on the PS5, and with a jailbroken PS5, you can simply find the whitelist text file on the hard drive and add the game title to the list to make it playable, allowing games like PT, Elden Ring Network Test, or the recently leaked build of Black Ops 6 multiplayer, and many other lost but not forgotten titles can be made playable on your jailbroken PS5. PS5 game piracy is also possible, but more tricky to deal with, as we don't have an equivalent of fake packages for native PS5 apps. Instead, we have to try and load them in their extracted form, with all the game files stored in a folder. We can use items flow to turn these dumped game files into a virtual app that can be mounted on the console and then launched, allowing a limited selection of PS5 game backups to be played. This also allows native PS5 games to be played off an external USB storage, whereas retail consoles will only let you load PS5 games off the internal storage or an M.2 drive. This doesn't just benefit the pirates though, as you can use this to dump your own retail game discs to create your own backups of your retail PS4 and PS5 games and run them without the original game disc or license. You can also keep them as a backup to play in a future emulator for the PS4 or PS5. Another benefit is access to cheats, trainers, and mods. At the time of recording, we don't have an equivalent to the Gold Hen cheats on the PS4, but I'm sure that's not too far off at this point. However, there is a payload known as PS5 Debug, which can be used to connect a remote debugging software, and this also includes trainers like PS4 Multi-Trainer 2, which have cheats available for many PS4 and PS5 titles that can be loaded on the PS5 to enable God mode, one-hit kill, infinite ammo, infinite items, currency, and more. Besides the 60 FPS patches, Illusion also has patches that can be loaded to enable hidden developer menus for games like Demon's Souls, Uncharted, Last of Us, and more. These menus allow you to freely explore the levels with no-clip, access developer tools, and access content that was cut from the game. You can also play games from older generation consoles through emulation. Sony developed software-based emulators to run Sega Saturn, PS1, PSP, and PS2 games on the PS4 so that they could release a limited selection of those games. These emulators have been dumped and can be repacked with any Sega Saturn, PS1, PS2, or PSP ISO to load these games on the PS5 through backwards compatibility. There's also a PS5 homebrew loader by John Tornblum that can be used to run some retro game emulators like Lake SNES and Madnafin, a multi-system emulator that can be used to play classic Sega and Nintendo games along with PS1 and many more. You can also use this homebrew loader to run Devolution X, a port of the original Diablo game for PC, and a similar port of Duke Nukem 3D. So those are really the benefits at the moment of jailbreaking a PS5, given that the actual jailbreak has only really been available for about a year at this point. So now we come to the downsides of jailbreaking the PS5, of which there are many. So firstly, we cannot access PSN as we need to remain on an older firmware to access the jailbreak, just like PS4. And this is a tethered jailbreak, which means you have to run it every single time you reboot the console, although it only takes a few seconds to load up the web browser and select ETA hen to get back up and running with the jailbreak. But the major problem is that the jailbreak is so old that it requires a PS5 that hasn't been updated in well over 2 years, and since we don't have access to the decryption keys to decrypt new PS5 titles like we do on PS4, we are limited to only being able to play PS5 games that were released up to mid-2022. Any PS5 games released after that point require a higher firmware to run, and unfortunately this limitation also applies to retail games. So to make matters even worse, of the PS5 games that can be loaded on this older firmware, not all of them can be loaded as game backups through items flow. PS5 games were not designed to be loaded in their extracted form, and this causes many PS5 games to crash when loaded this way. So the number of PS5 game backups that are actually playable is extremely limited. Now, PS4 game compatibility is much better since they can be installed as fake packages. However, they're not without their own issues, so DLC content will not be recognized by the game after it's been installed. To make PS4 DLC work on the PS5, we need to install the DLC as part of the update file instead of a separate DLC package. Now, this process can be time consuming, and there are some popular games that are already converted so that they will work with the PS5 automatically when you install them, with all the DLC included. But for most PS4 games, this will need to be done manually if you want access to the DLC. And there are many quality of life features that have not yet been implemented on the PS5. Now, one of the main reasons for this is that we don't actually have many developers working on the PS5 due to its availability and cost. So back when the exploit was new, we were still in the middle of COVID and a global chip shortage, making these consoles extremely expensive due to their limited availability. And even nowadays, finding a PS5 on a jailbreakable firmware can be extremely challenging due to the requirement of the console to be on a much older firmware that is 2.5 years old. So I don't want to come across as too pessimistic. You have to bear in mind that this jailbreak has only been out for a year at this point, whereas the PS4 jailbreak has been out since about 2016. So it's had much longer to actually get to where it's at right now. Whereas the PS5 jailbreak, yes, the PS5 itself came out at the back end of 2020, but the jailbreak, having access to something that is pretty much a full jailbreak at this point, that only started in 2023. So there's only really been a year of development on this so far. So the best hope, in my opinion, for better improvement is for a newer jailbreak to be released for the PS5 that targets a much higher firmware to remove that requirement of having a console to be 2.5 years old to be jailbreakable. So the PS4 was recently jailbroken up to firmware 11.0, and that same vulnerability also exists in the PS5 up to firmware 8.20. So there is a good chance that we might get some kind of new jailbreak for the PS5 up to 8.20 at some time in the near future. But time will tell if the PS5's extra security measures will prevent that from happening. So anyway, that's pretty much it for this video. Those are the current benefits and downsides to jailbreaking a PS5 in 2024 as of August. So hope you guys enjoyed this video or found the information useful. If you did, please leave a like and subscribe. And once again, I'll hopefully see you guys in the next video.